For decades, Angie Dickinson kept her silence while the world saw only Johnny Carson's charming, quick-witted television persona. But now, at 93, she finally speaks. The words are tender, complex, and revealing. This is her truth about one of television's most beloved yet enigmatic figures. The woman who dazzled Hollywood with her talent and beauty pulls back the curtain on a relationship that few truly understood. Through all the headlines, rumors, and late-night monologues, Angie watched quietly from the wings. What she shares now reframes not just her own Hollywood journey, but how we understand the man who invited America into his living room each night. Stay with us. What she reveals will change how you see the king of late night forever. Johnny Carson remains frozen in our collective memory. The sophisticated host behind the desk, cigarette in hand, that knowing smile as he delivered punchlines to millions of Americans for 30 years. He was the voice that tucked the nation in at night. But who was the man behind that carefully crafted persona? And why has Angie Dickinson, star of Policewoman and Hollywood icon in her own right, chosen to speak now about their connection? What makes this revelation significant isn't just its timing. It's that it comes from Dickinson, a woman whose own remarkable career often competed with headlines about her relationships. Her words offer us not tabloid fodder, but a thoughtful reflection on fame, connection, and the complicated reality behind television's golden age. In an era where we're reconsidering how we tell stories about powerful men and the women in their orbit, Dickinson's perspective arrives as both historical document and personal testimony. Her words matter because they remind us that behind every polished celebrity image lies a human story, complex, nuanced, and rarely as simple as the headlines suggested. What happened between these two television icons that remained unspoken for all these years? And why choose to share it now, when Carson has been gone for nearly 2 decades? Angela K. Dickinson was born in Combe, North Dakota, on September 30th, 1931, to Frederica and Leo Dickinson. The family moved to Burbank, California when Angie was 10, placing her in the shadow of the very industry that would later define her life. As a young woman in post-war America, Angie attended Immaculate Heart College and later Glendale College, where she studied business with practical Midwestern sensibility, not starry-eyed Hollywood dreams. Her entry into entertainment came almost by accident. In 1953, while working as a secretary, the striking 22-year-old entered a local beauty contest and was spotted by a television producer. Her first small roles came on anthology series like Death Valley Days and The Schlitz Playhouse, where she quickly demonstrated that she was more than just a beautiful face. By 1956, Howard Hawks cast her in Rio Bravo, opposite John Wayne and Dean Martin. The role showcased her unique screen presence, tough yet vulnerable, sensual yet approachable. She wasn't manufactured by the studio system. She arrived fully formed with a distinctive voice and presence. Meanwhile, in New York, a young Johnny Carson was finding his footing in the emerging medium of television. Born in Iowa in 1925, Carson had served in the Navy before working in radio and local TV. By 1955, he was hosting game shows and developing the quick wit and timing that would later make him famous. The paths of these two Midwesterners, both transplanted to the coasts, both learning to navigate the unwritten rules of entertainment, were set to cross in ways neither could have anticipated. In 1959, as Dickinson's film career gained momentum with roles like Ocean's 11, Carson was preparing for the opportunity that would define his life, taking over NBC's Tonight Show from Jack Paar. The stage was being set for a relationship that would remain largely hidden from public view for decades. By the early 1960s, Angie Dickinson had become one of Hollywood's most sought-after actresses. Following her breakthrough in Rio Bravo, she earned a Golden Globe for The Killers in 1964, working alongside future President Ronald Reagan in what would be his final film role. Her career defied easy categorization. She moved between westerns, crime dramas, and comedies with an ease that showcased her range. Johnny Carson, meanwhile, took over The Tonight Show in October 1962, beginning what would become a 30-year reign as America's late-night companion. Within months, he transformed the format from Jack Paar's talk-heavy approach to entertainment that balanced interviews, comedy, and Carson's increasingly confident monologues. On a cool September evening in 1965, Dickinson made her first appearance on Carson's Tonight Show. The studio lights were hot and the pre-interview tension palpable. Carson's producer briefed her minutes before airtime. "Johnny likes guests who can roll with the punches. Don't take yourself too seriously." When the red light came on, something electric happened. Their chemistry was immediate. Carson's normally controlled demeanor gave way to genuine laughter as Dickinson matched his wit line for line. She wasn't there to be decorative. She challenged him, teased him, and created a dynamic that had the crew exchanging glances behind the cameras. "Cut to commercial," called the floor director. But Carson and Dickinson continued talking, leaning toward each other as their microphones were temporarily dead. Ed McMahon later recalled, "Johnny didn't usually stay engaged with guests during breaks. With Angie, he wouldn't let the conversation drop." Throughout the late 1960s, Dickinson reinvented herself with each role, from the sultry Big Bad Mama to sophisticated turns in The Art of Love and The Chase. By 1974, she had secured her iconic role as Sergeant Leanne Pepper Anderson in Policewoman, becoming one of the first women to headline a successful drama series. The show ran for 4 seasons and earned her 3 Emmy nominations. Carson, too, was cementing his legacy. By 1972, The Tonight Show had moved from New York to Burbank, placing him and Dickinson in the same tight-knit entertainment community of Southern California. As their professional lives soared, the personal connection between them grew in complexity, but that's where it gets complicated. Hollywood in the 1970s operated by its own unwritten code. Stars of Carson's and Dickinson's magnitude moved in overlapping circles, but maintained careful public images. Their professional worlds intersected regularly at industry events, award shows, and of course, the periodic appearances Dickinson made on The Tonight Show. By 1974, when Policewoman premiered, Dickinson had become a feminist icon of sorts, playing a character with authority in a male-dominated profession. Carson, meanwhile, was in his 3rd marriage to Joanna Holland and at the height of his cultural power. Each Tonight Show appearance by Dickinson became an event, carefully anticipated by the audience and meticulously prepared for by the production team. "Johnny always brightened when we booked Angie," recalled longtime Tonight Show producer Fred de Cordova in a 1987 interview. He'd asked for the pre-interview notes himself, which wasn't his usual practice. Their on-screen dynamic evolved into something viewers recognized and anticipated: the playful banter, the lingering eye contact, the barely concealed admiration. During a 1976 appearance promoting Policewoman, Carson abandoned his note cards entirely, leading to an unstructured conversation that meandered from her work to shared memories of Midwestern childhoods. Behind the scenes, their connection developed in the shadow of Hollywood's most prestigious venues. They were spotted deep in conversation at Chasen's restaurant after the 1977 Emmy Awards. At a NBC executive's retirement party in 1979, they reportedly disappeared onto the terrace for over an hour, returning separately to the gathering. What made their connection particularly complicated was its context. Carson was television's beloved host, married and carefully maintaining his public image. Dickinson had divorced composer Burt Bacharach in 1976 after a 10-year marriage and was navigating Hollywood as a single woman in her 40s, something that carried its own set of unspoken judgments in that era. "In those days, you protected your private life fiercely," Dickinson later told Vanity Fair in a 2005 interview. "There were things the public didn't need to know, and frankly, wouldn't have understood in the context of the times. Now, if you're wondering how 2 such public figures could maintain any sort of private relationship, whether friendship or something more, remember that this was decades before social media and smartphone cameras. The walls between public and private lives were more definable, maintained by mutual agreements between celebrities and the press that seem almost quaint by today's standards." February 1980. The Tonight Show was celebrating Carson's 18th anniversary as host. The guest list included Hollywood royalty, but the appearance everyone anticipated was Dickinson's. By this time, she had become one of Carson's most frequent and popular guests, having appeared more than a dozen times. The studio that night hummed with an energy the crew recognized but couldn't quite name. Dickinson arrived early, bypassing the standard pre-interview with the show's staff writers. She and Johnny have their own shorthand, explained talent coordinator Jim McCauley. We learned to just let it happen. When she walked onto the stage in a signature red dress, the audience erupted. Carson stood, something he rarely did for guests, and embraced her a moment longer than protocol dictated. What followed was television that seemed to forget it was television. A conversation so intimate that the studio audience fell silent at points, sensing they were witnessing something rare. You know, Johnny, Dickinson said at one point, removing her signature large earrings and placing them on his desk, sometimes I think you're the only one in this town who remembers who we were before all this. She gestured vaguely at the studio. Carson, normally guarded about personal matters, replied quietly, That's because we remember the same America, Angie. For a moment, his practiced mask slipped, revealing a vulnerability rarely seen by his millions of viewers. During a commercial break, makeup artist Marvin Westmore noticed something unusual. Johnny reached for her hand under the desk, just briefly, he recalled years later. It wasn't romantic exactly. It was like a lifeline between two people who understood something no one else did. What the cameras captured that night became one of the most requested clips in NBC archives. Dickinson telling a story about a disaster on the policewoman set, Carson laughing so genuinely that he had to wipe his eyes in a moment when they both fell silent, seemingly forgetting the cameras entirely. Viewers and entertainment columnists speculated wildly. Had something been revealed? Was there an admission hidden in plain sight? Carson's marriage to Holland was showing public strains, and Dickinson's romantic life was frequent tabloid fodder. But what happened on camera that night wasn't scandal. It was a rare moment of authentic connection between two people who had spent decades maintaining careful public personas. Everyone thought they understood what they saw, Dickinson reportedly told a friend years later, but the truth is always more complicated than what makes it through the camera lens. And that's when everything changed. The aftermath of that February 1980 appearance triggered a series of events that neither Carson nor Dickinson could have anticipated. Entertainment columnists from Rona Barrett to Liz Smith hinted at an undisclosed relationship. Carson's marriage to Joanna Holland publicly unraveled, ending in a 1985 divorce that reportedly cost him $20 million. At the time, one of Hollywood's most expensive settlements. What's rarely discussed is how the speculation affected their professional relationship. Following the media frenzy, Dickinson didn't appear on The Tonight Show for nearly 18 months, an absence noted by industry insiders. Johnny created a careful separation, explained a former NBC executive who requested anonymity for a 2010 retrospective on Carson, not because there was anything inappropriate, but because he was pathologically private. Any hint that his personal life was fodder for public consumption would trigger his retreat. When Dickinson finally returned to the show in late 1981, viewers noticed the difference. The easy intimacy had been replaced by a performance of formality. Carson stuck rigidly to prepared questions. Dickinson gave polished, promotional answers about her latest projects. The magic that had captivated audiences was carefully contained. Off-camera, accounts suggest a more complicated reality. At Gerald Ford's Presidential Library, opening in 1981, photographers captured Carson and Dickinson in animated conversation at opposite ends of the room, only to discover them sharing a quiet moment in the library's garden an hour later. At a 1983 benefit for Children's Hospital, they arrived separately but were seen leaving in the same car. The pressures shaping their relationship weren't just external. Carson was navigating his own demons, his legendary insomnia, his growing detachment from the entertainment industry he ostensibly ruled, his complex relationships with his sons. Dickinson, meanwhile, was fighting Hollywood's cruel dismissal of women over 40, seeking roles that honored her talent rather than just her beauty. The industry loves putting people in boxes, Dickinson later reflected in her 2006 autobiography. If they couldn't categorize a relationship, they'd either invent a simple narrative or ignore it entirely. Neither served the truth. By the mid-1980s, both were experiencing professional transitions. Dickinson's roles became more selective as she pushed back against ageist casting. Carson began hinting at retirement, increasingly allowing guest hosts to take his chair. Their paths continued to cross at industry events, but always under the watchful eyes of a media eager for confirmation of stories they had already written in their heads. What no one saw coming was how fiercely both would protect whatever truth existed between them. Neither gave interviews discussing the other beyond professional courtesy. Neither confirmed nor denied the speculation. They maintained a dignity increasingly rare in an industry that was beginning to commodify private lives for public consumption. Stay with us because the silence between them would stretch for decades, until now. The years following their most public connections saw both Carson and Dickinson transform in ways that seemed to propel them further from whatever they had shared. By 1986, Carson's personal life had retreated almost entirely behind the walls of his Malibu compound. He married his fourth wife, Alexis Moss, in 1987, and gradually reduced his public appearances outside of The Tonight Show. Dickinson, meanwhile, took on roles that reflected a new phase in her career. Mature characters with depth and complexity in films like Big Bad Love and Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill. While her star remained bright, she became increasingly selective, turning down roles that didn't challenge her as an actress. Their professional orbits rarely intersected during this period. Between 1985 and Carson's retirement in 1992, Dickinson appeared on The Tonight Show just 3 times. Brief, professional segments that gave no hint of their previous connection. The warmth remained, but the cameras captured only what they were permitted to see. In a quiet moment that speaks volumes about their relationship, Carson reportedly called Dickinson the night before his final Tonight Show broadcast on May 21, 1992. According to a longtime friend of Dickinson's who spoke to Vanity Fair years later, it was a brief conversation. Johnny wasn't one for prolonged goodbyes, but he wanted her to hear from him directly that he was leaving television. Not as a host calling a frequent guest, but as one friend to another. Dickinson did not attend Carson's final show, though she was apparently invited. Instead, she sent a handwritten note that he kept in his desk drawer, a detail revealed by his longtime assistant after his death. The years following Carson's retirement created even more distance. He became almost reclusive, occasionally sending jokes to David Letterman, but otherwise maintaining his privacy with near religious devotion. Dickinson continued working, taking roles in films like Pay It Forward and making television appearances, but also stepping back from the relentless pace of her earlier career. When Carson's son Rick died in a car accident in 1991, Dickinson sent flowers but did not attend the service. When Dickinson received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Costume Designers Guild in 1999, Carson sent a telegram of congratulations rather than appearing in person. They maintained a careful distance that respected the boundaries each had established. Perhaps most telling was a moment in 1999 when NBC celebrated Carson's career with a 3-hour special. Dickinson declined to participate on camera, instead sending a written statement that was never aired. According to production notes later donated to the Museum of Television, her message simply read, "Some connections don't need explanation or performance." Johnny knows what he meant to me. The truth is quieter than the headlines. Off camera, the story was different. And after Carson's death in 2005, Dickinson maintained her silence for nearly 2 decades. January 2023. Angie Dickinson, now in her 90s, sat in her modest Beverly Hills home, surrounded by photographs documenting a life in entertainment. The interviewer from a streaming documentary series had come to discuss her groundbreaking role in Policewoman, but the conversation gradually turned to the giants of entertainment she had known. "You worked with everyone," the interviewer noted. "Sinatra, Wayne, Marvin, and of course all those appearances with Johnny Carson." Something shifted in Dickinson's expression, a softening, a decision being made. "Johnny," she said quietly, "you know, it's been almost 20 years since he passed. Maybe it's time." What followed was an hour of reflection that never made it into the documentary, but became the foundation for a memoir Dickinson began writing in the spring of 2023. In pages described by her publisher as neither exposé nor romance, but a meditation on connection in the spotlight, Dickinson finally addresses what existed between her and Carson. "What we shared wasn't what people assumed," she writes in an excerpt published in Vanity Fair in early 2025. "It wasn't a grand affair or secret romance. Those are easy narratives that miss the point entirely. What Johnny and I had was understanding. We were two Midwesterners thrust into a machinery neither of us quite trusted, trying to remain authentic while playing roles both on and off camera. She describes moments never previously shared. Carson calling her after difficult episodes of Policewoman to offer specific technical praise for her acting choices. Dickinson sending him notes about particularly sharp monologues. Late-night phone conversations during his bouts of insomnia where they spoke not about show business, but about the small towns they'd left behind. Johnny created a persona that was sophisticated, cosmopolitan, she writes, but in private, he was still that Nebraska boy with a sense of wonder about where life had taken him. He never fully trusted his success, always waiting for someone to reveal he didn't belong. I understood that feeling because I carried my own version of it. Perhaps most revealing is her description of what happened after that famous 1980 appearance. The media created a narrative that didn't exist, and in defending against it, we had to step back from what did exist, a friendship that mattered deeply to both of us. In interviews promoting her memoir, Dickinson explains her long silence. Johnny valued privacy above almost everything. Speaking while he was alive would have hurt him deeply. Speaking too soon after his death would have seemed opportunistic. But now it feels like honoring him to tell the truth about the man behind the desk. Not just the bits people want to sensationalize, but the full humanity of someone who was much more complex than his perfect suits and perfect timing suggested. Her revelations aren't scandalous. Perhaps that's why they feel so authentic. She describes Carson's complexity, his kindness and his distance, his generosity and his walls, his professional support and his personal struggles. He once told me, "Angie, we're both playing characters named after ourselves," she recounts. That was the burden and gift we shared, understanding the difference between the person and the persona. What Angie Dickinson offers us now isn't just a peek behind the curtain of two extraordinary careers. It's a reconsideration of how we understand fame itself, particularly in the golden age of television and film that shaped our current media landscape. Carson's legacy has been largely frozen since his death. The cool, controlled host who defined late-night television and then walked away from the spotlight almost completely. Dickinson's perspective adds dimension to that flat image. She reveals a man who carried deep insecurities beneath his confident exterior, who created connection through humor but often struggled with intimacy, who was simultaneously the most public and most private figure in American entertainment. Johnny created a template that every host since has had to either follow or deliberately reject, she notes. But what most people miss is that his greatest talent wasn't telling jokes. It was listening. When those cameras were on, he listened with his entire being. That's what made guests trust him, what made his reactions so genuine. He was fully present in a way few people in television have matched since. Her reflections also reframe her own remarkable career. For too long, Dickinson's story has been told through the lens of her relationships and her beauty rather than her pioneering work. In discussing her connection with Carson, she reclaims the narrative of her own life, painting a picture of mutual respect between two professionals who understood the machinery of fame from the inside. You can almost see them in those moments after the cameras stopped rolling on The Tonight Show. Two performers who could finally exhale, who didn't need to explain the strange reality of being known by millions but truly understood by few. What's most striking about Dickinson's revelations is what they don't contain. There's no bitterness, no settling of scores, no sensationalism. Instead, there's a clear-eyed assessment of two careers that intersected at key moments, two lives that ran parallel in many ways, and a connection that defied easy categorization. I've outlived nearly everyone from that era, she writes in the conclusion of her memoir. That carries a responsibility to speak honestly about the people behind the images we've preserved. Johnny deserves to be remembered not just as an entertainer, but as a human being of depth and contradiction, generous and guarded, hilarious and melancholy, confident and questioning. The man I knew was far more interesting than the legend. For those who grew up watching Carson each night, who remember Dickinson breaking barriers on Policewoman, her perspective offers something precious, not a tawdry behind-the-scenes account, but a humanizing of icons who have been flattened by history into simple archetypes. The truth she offers now, at 93, isn't about exposure, but understanding. It reminds us that behind every perfectly crafted public image lies a complex human story waiting to be told. We began with silence. Angie Dickinson watching for decades as Johnny Carson's legacy was shaped by others, as speculation about their connection fueled whispers, but never truth. Now her voice finally emerges, not with scandal, but with something far more valuable: humanity. The woman who faced down outlaws on film and broke barriers on television now performs perhaps her most authentic role, as witness to an era and a relationship that few understood. Her words don't dismantle Carson's legacy. They enrich it with complexity and nuance. There are connections in life that defy simple labels, she writes. Johnny and I moved in a world where everything was categorized, marketed, sold. What we shared existed in the margins of that world, real precisely because it wasn't for public consumption. As the lights dim on Hollywood's golden age, Dickinson's testimony stands as both history and invitation, asking us to look beyond the perfect suits and camera-ready smiles to the complicated people who wore them, to recognize that our cultural icons carried the same contradictions, fears, and hopes as the rest of us, even as they appeared each night in our living rooms, seemingly perfect and untouchable. What moment in this story resonates most with you? Is it the young Midwesterners finding their way in an industry that demanded performance both on and off camera? The connection that defied easy definition? Or perhaps the dignity of a silence maintained for decades out of respect rather than secrecy? In Angie Dickinson's final act, she gives us not just her truth, but a more human way to remember one of television's most enduring figures, not as the king of late night, but as Johnny from Nebraska, who found in Angie from North Dakota someone who remembered who he was before the crown.